With me today is video producer, children's author, podcaster, Peter Reynolds. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So you've got a couple different podcasts, and I want to talk about the first one that you did, which is, remind me the title.
Musings and Other Nonsense.
Which is a podcast for children.
That's right.
And it's based on the fact that you wrote two children's books, right? That's the origin of it anyway. Right?
Absolutely. And the idea was for every children's book you write, there may be 10 or 15 stories, that are too short,
Right.
that are not quite ready. And they just sat in my hard drive, completely seen by no one.
And the interesting thing about you is you've now moved on to a second podcast, in the name of which is
Prose and Conversations.
And it's more of a business podcast, but I figure some people watching this may have considered doing a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it would be kind of fun and perhaps instructive to compare notes and that
Absolutely.
sort of thing. So
Absolutely.
you being a veteran of two podcasts now, and me with my own fledgling video-only podcast. So, I've been doing it a while.
I'm aspiring to be you when I grow up. Are you kidding me? This is an
Well,
incredible
setup.
setup.
Again, no audio. This isn't audio. I've thought about, I could make these audio by just making MP3 files out of them.
Exactly.
But I'm a video, where I come from, in my head, I'm a video guy, so I want to make videos. So
Yeah.
where did your interest in children's books come from? I assume you were a child at one point.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I was a child, as you said. I
Right.
do enjoy reading. And I've always been, someone who, enjoys writing poetry and stories and these ideas. But it wasn't until my son was born
Right.
that I really started, because I'll make up stories for him on the fly, bedtime. And it really wasn't until he was born that I started to think to myself, I want to write some stories that are for him,
Right.
and put some of these stories down. So I had been working on various ideas when he asked me one day. He said, I think he was about 5 or 6, and he said, "Dad, from the time things are lost till the time they're found, where do they go?" And being a budding children's author, I naturally said, a magical world that contains all lost things. And that was really the catalyst for my wife saying, "You know what, this needs to be a book.
Right.
This story."
So you scribbled it down right
and
away.
we scribbled it
that's a cool
down.
idea.
And then basically wrote it down, showed it to a variety of family members to get their reactions, and then went on the whole sort of journey of getting it to have it published.
Another book, Stitches. So tell me, that's a very different. That's a much more longer, much heavier text in it.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that as my son has aged, my writing has changed because he wants a different story for me to tell him, something that's
Right.
a little bit more advanced. So
Right.
I wrote the story of Stitches in Time Travel, which is a Christmas story about a young girl who is staying at her Nana's house over Christmas, and she finds a magical quilt that travels through time. And
Okay.
and the thing about this quilt is that it will only take you back within your own family history. And she travels back in time and meets her family and gets stuck there. Now, the only problem is she has her mother, her grandmother, and her great-grandmother to help her, but they're only 10 years old as well. I'm actually working on the sequel because it's had such a great reaction from people. So we're working on Fabric of Time Travel, which is going to be the sequel coming up.
So you even had a podcast, Musings and Other Nonsense.
Yep.
Which was about children's stories, poems, songs, and they're very short. They're about 3 or 4 minutes each.
Exactly.
Were you trying to promote them?
So that was, so again, it was a bit of a pandemic project. And, every other week, you have a new episode where you read one of your poems.
And your son's on it with you?
Yeah, so we
Right.
did it. We did it as a project together. So I would write a poem. Sometimes it's appropriate for me to read it. Sometimes it's from the child's perspective, so he would write it. So it's been a wonderful project, and the response has been incredible. 105 countries,
Which is
we're in.
amazing, right?
It's amazing.
So, and you've done about 36 of them, right?
Yeah.
And now you have a new podcast, Prose and Conversations. So what's that about?
So Prose and Conversations evolved out of the video production side.
Right.
And the idea is that when you do video production, as you know very well, you're meeting people, but maybe for an hour. You're not, you meet these really interesting people from the world of business or science or the arts, but you never get a chance to talk to them at any length.
Right.
And it just always in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be fun to have a podcast or to have some venue that I could talk with these people that have always interested me? Then at the same time, I had joined a networking group, called the Business Alliance, which is sort of a group of
In Toronto, in your neighborhood?
in Toronto, yeah, and it's a variety of different businesses, and we get together to sort of support each other, and we started to talk about entrepreneurship and small business and all the sort of intricacies of it, and I thought to myself, is there a way that we can sort of combine the two, where I can talk to people that I find really interesting, but as opposed to it just being an entertainment show, could we offer value to viewers who are entrepreneurs, small business owners, talking to people who've been there?
Right.
And so that's been
So you're talking about marketing and sales. I've heard a couple of the
exactly,
first ones.
exactly.
So marketing and sales.
Marketing and
things like
sales
that.
and
Business issues.
and investment. And we're actually just talking to a therapist who works with anxiety.
That'll be useful.
So
yes.
I think it'd be very useful.
Everyone's got it. Everyone's got anxiety. So I think you're onto something there. So what have you learned about podcasting along the way? Like what that you've applied to your new project? Because everyone's interested in podcasting these days, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Sometimes it bothers me as somebody who's come from has a background in television and whose father was in radio. And, this idea of someone does a radio show and puts it on the internet and calls it a podcast. And it's like, it's still a radio show. But what have I learned, you asked, to get back to that? It is the number one piece of advice I would give for anybody starting a podcast is consistency.
Right.
That is the absolute key. That people get bogged down with things having to be perfect, with the guests having to be perfect. There's a certain minimum requirement when it comes to the technical side, of course, but it is better to have consistency because that's how you build an audience. And I learned that with the first podcast with Musings and Other Nonsense, is that as long as I was coming out every week with an episode, people were waiting. Parents were waiting,
Right.
And that really made a huge difference in terms of building an audience.
I've got a couple of stats for you. So as you know, there's a billion. Okay, that's not a real stat, but a billion podcasts, or it seems like it, right? Most people quit after 6 or 7 attempts. Mm-hmm. So there's part of your consistency is like they just stop, right? It's not what they thought it would be, or they're not getting the reaction. Also, if you have just 28 downloads, 28,
Yeah.
that puts you in the top 50% of all podcasts, which is nuts.
Yep.
Which is nuts. So that shows you how many there are. Given those kind of stats, why do it? Why do you do the podcasts in the first place?
Well, I did for Musings, I did the podcast because, unless you have an audience for your writing, you're simply the most famous writer on your hard drive.
Right.
You know,
You're
and
in your house.
you're in your house, and you know, the
On your
idea
walk.
was let's get it out there and
Right.
see, because you know, I write something, my wife looks at it and loves it, my son looks at it and loves it, but is it any good? You know,
Right.
you got to get it out there. And very quickly, of the 35 episodes, I probably identified, you know, half of them that I was getting such an incredible reaction to them. People saying, this was amazing. My son wants to play it every single night. Thanks a lot for writing it because it's driving me crazy.
So are you writing new stories or poems for each
Yes,
podcast?
every episode is
And
an
you're each
original.
you're acting it out?
Yep. Each one is an
Okay.
original poem or song. And then the prose and conversations, the that, you know, and you ask why do I do it? And I think that there's probably, you know, twofold. You know, one is, you know, when they talk about promoting with For the Record Productions and myself, you know, sort of promoting your brand and marketing yourself, people will talk about do a blog. Okay.
Right.
I have tried and failed to do blogs.
Yeah.
They don't work for me. They say do a newsletter. I know I'm not going to do a newsletter. The just I've tried. It's not going to work. So how do I, you know, get my name out there? You know, get you know, without hitting people over the head with, you know, I'm looking for your business. How do I reach out to more people, raise my profile, raise the company's profile, and this seemed like the perfect marriage because it's something I love doing.
You're one of the rare people that have actually, you're now on your second whole podcast project. And I'm on my first, it's a video only podcast, but I thought we could it might be kind of fun to compare notes and that
Absolutely.
sort of thing. So now that I've been at it a while, I've identified 5 parts to the process, my process.
Yeah.
So this is where you feel free to disagree with me.
I'm ready.
Okay. And because your process is very different because you do something different, slightly different, right? So 5 areas. First area I'm calling the producing. So it's almost like pre-production. So I have to, who am I going to interview? I come up with an idea. There's Peter. He's got a children's book. I need to talk to Peter about the business behind. So, so it's the searching for and the booking of guests, which is hard because not everyone wants to do it, and it takes a lot of time. It feels like I'm dating. People not replying to my emails or whatever, and there's some ghosting. Like people just don't want to do it. How is it for you on your new podcast? You've taken a different approach. You've got a co-host, so you don't need to worry necessarily about booking guests. For the first few anyway, you've got a co-host. Is that a permanent co-host or how's that?
Yeah, so
working?
I brought. So it's interesting because you're right. For the Musings and Other Nonsense, I write it myself. There's no guests. So and people have actually offered to come on and read their stories, and I've actually shied away from that. I wanted to keep it just the stories that I was writing. So you're right. I don't have to deal with that. With Prose and Conversations, so Damon Adachi is his name. He's a marketing consultant. And we met through the Business Alliance. We met through the marketing, through the networking group. And because the work of the podcast was dealing with entrepreneurs and small business, it seemed like a natural marriage. And really, initially, he was going to come on for maybe just a few episodes, you know, to talk about marketing and his sort of area. But as sometimes the magic happens, we had a real great rapport. And it was nice when we would talk to a guest that I would come at it from one angle, he would come at it from another, and we seemed to be able to draw more out of our guests. And so far it's been a happy marriage of that. But you're 100% right. I've been kind of lucky in that the guests that I've been getting, sort of sometimes the next guest evolves out of the first one. So we'll talk to somebody and we'll have a great opportunity, and then we'll say, do you know anybody?
Right.
And they'll say, oh gosh, you have to speak to so
Yeah.
and so. So that's been kind of how we've been tackling at least that first challenge.
Right. And I mean, I get a sense that you're interviewed. Is it, what's his name? Damon?
Damon, yeah.
Damon. You're interviewing him. So he's kind of responsible for bringing the content, is he?
So
in this particular case?
So in the case of so what we did was,
you're a host and that's how I kind of perceive it. You're a host and he's bringing the content.
What happened is that in the, so the first episode, I interviewed Damon about marketing. Okay.
Right.
So he was on as the marketing expert to talk about the difference between marketing and branding and sales, when it came to small business and entrepreneurship. So that was really sort of the first episode. Then we interviewed, the next person we interviewed was about automation and bringing technology into your small business. But there's an element of, of branding and marketing in that sort of process. And I thought to myself, well, let's bring Damon on as a co-host, so that he can kind of bring that perspective. So then he fell into the co-host role. And that's where he's sort of been for the last, we've recorded 10 episodes so far, 3 have aired.
Wow.
And that's where he's sort of fallen in, where I'll come at it often from, sort of like the video production, from the promotion side, and then he'll come at it, with, how is this impacting branding? How is this impacting your marketing strategy?
Right.
And so it's been a real fun experience. And I'll say this about your previous question when it comes to creating a podcast, not having too many rigid expectations, allowing things to evolve in your podcast. And that's what we're trying to do with Pros and Conversations, is kind of see how it goes, and maybe 20 episodes in, we look back and see what subject was popular, and then we can narrow the focus.
Right. Right. So I'm committed to these 5 points.
Number 3.
I'm only on number 2. So the number 2 for me, again, there's producing, which is like booking the guest, right? Which feels like producing to me. That's why I call it producing. It's like not my favorite part of the process.
Yeah.
Then when I book someone, I do research. I want it to be prepared for these interviews, and sometimes I have a couple weeks notice. So I'll try to think of I'll try to do minimal Google kind of research. Sometimes people have written a book, like our mutual acquaintance Aggie Gabor, and that's a lot of preparation, frankly, because you got to read a book, and there's a certain responsibility I find too. So that's research, coming up with questions like, what's the story, right? So that's again just me. 3 is the interview itself. So that's basically what we're doing now. So I really wanted to do it. I wanted to, again, put my middle finger up at the whole pandemic thing. I really missed, again, as I said, interviewing, but in person. I want to do them in person. You're continuing to do them via some sort of a Zoomish thing, right?
Exactly.
So what's your thinking on doing your current podcast just as a Zoom thing? It's easy, I guess. You guys don't need to be in the same place.
So this is an interesting story, because my podcast, Pros and Conversations, really evolved from work. So I take you back to March 2020, and video production, my production, everything dropped to 0.
Yeah.
There was nothing. And not only were people not coming into work, no events,
right.
no nothing. And and people were kind of just, sort of holding pattern. But I realized sort of early on that they still needed to communicate with their staff, with their customers, with their clients in the community. So I started to reach out and say, why don't we record people remotely? Okay. And, either we can record them on their cell phones. Okay. And then they can transfer the file to me. And that was kind of a little bit of the start. We tried that, and they say, hey, let's move to Zoom. okay, and see if I can record you on Zoom. And very quickly, thank goodness, my clients totally got on board with the idea of remote recording. And it started with their executive directors just talking to their staff. Here are our COVID protocols. Here's what we're doing. That changed into actually programs and training, and that they would want to reach out to their membership and say, so it has evolved in the last 2 years to where, 80% of the work that I'm doing is recording everything via this. I use a program called Riverside FM, which is similar to Zoom. And it's been wonderful because not only are they able to turn things around very quickly, but they're able to get experts and people from all across the country.
The world. Yeah.
So there's no travel.
Well, the technology is amazing. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about it, and perhaps there's no going back. But there is.
And that got me thinking,
Yeah.
it's like if it's a lot easier to call somebody up and say, I need half hour of your time than I need a half day of your time to come in and record. And do I eventually want, a setup like this? Of course,
Well,
it
it may never go back to it because, there's something about in-person interviews because imperceptibly we're picking up each other's cues. There's subtle little. I can make little comments. You can make little comments. It's where it's just different, and I did miss it. Some of the early people, my early interview subjects that were on the show, as I said to you yesterday, this is my first out of the house. This is my first meeting in person, and it was very, very, electric almost. Like
Absolutely.
I find also in live person to person, sometimes there's a real chemistry because there's a show. It feels like a show.
Yeah.
So there's some adrenaline. You hit start. And so I think some of the interviews are better in person than they would have been in that kind of disconnected
100%.
kind of thing, even though it works.
Yep.
It's one of those weird things. And I just wonder what the future is. Unknown and unwritten, I suppose.
Are we?
I don't think we're ever going to go back.
Will there be a third person here that's just a monitor?
Yeah, I mean, you could talk to someone anywhere in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Like the live streaming community, that there's people. I follow people in Sweden and Portland, Oregon. They're all over the place, and the quality is so good, and the internet is so fast, and the cameras and the sound, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's just. I guess I'm just a dinosaur, so I want to.
No, it's exciting, and I think that it's definitely going to be some sort of a hybrid model. I think that the challenge is I think you're 100% right that there is something intangible about interviewing somebody in person that can enrich the quality of the interview. But I think ultimately that's going to be overshadowed by the convenience.
Yes, and it also depends on the type of interview. So I've done some that are very personal and at times very sensitive and emotional, right? And I think sometimes on the phone you lose that because there's, let this person breathe and just get it all out kind of thing. And some of that is like a personal. It's the personal in the same space. Anyway, it's exciting. There's no doubt about it. I'm not.
Can you get empathy across Zoom? I mean,
I think people's voices are a little different too. Like they're projecting maybe, and it's a little. I just maybe it's just 5%. Maybe it's just that 5% shaved off the top. Maybe you would have had a different interview. Again, it depends on the subject matter. So if you're talking about marketing and it's a bullet point, if it's a PowerPoint chart you're reading, maybe that's all you need. So step number 4 of 5 for me is editing. So I can't help myself. Like I will edit this, but it allows me some freedom in the interview. Let's just talk.
Yeah.
And then I'll go back later and do some editing. A lot of podcasters will talk for an hour and a half. or longer sometimes. Like a Joe Rogan might talk for 3 hours,
Yeah.
For better or for worse, right? I don't know. What do you think about like this post production?
So
I
yeah,
can't resist though, right?
no,
Like fixing
I,
things.
I have to. I struggle. I struggle with it. One of the challenges is
As you
that
said, it doesn't need to be perfect though, but
no,
editing sends you in that direction, right?
no, it doesn't need to be perfect, but yeah, it's very challenging. I actually find the video podcast, when you have a video, when you create the video and the audio comes from the video, it's much easier because when you are editing audio only, you want to take out every every
Yes,
because you hear it,
I've done that.
and the audience doesn't necessarily hear it, but I hear every 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 and I want to lift it.
I'll give you two examples. So I'm not used to being on camera, so I'm getting used to it. But one interview I did, and I'm just doing a lot of listening, but I'm filling you filling in all those gaps. So I kept saying right. So you're talking, I'm just going right, right, and I didn't hear it until maybe the third time through, and then I couldn't unhear it. So I went through and I cut out, like, because I'm not always on camera, so I cut out like 60 times where I said right. And there's another one with a gentleman, he had a bit of a wet nose, so before he talked, he'd sniff in.
Yeah.
And as soon as I heard it, I didn't hear it live.
Yeah.
Didn't notice it live, and as soon as I heard, I went through and cut out like 60 sniffs.
Yeah.
Because I think it's one of those things I can't not fix it.
Yeah.
But you're right. Podcasting, part of the genius of podcasting is it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be scripted necessarily.
No. If the content is good, if the content is compelling, your audience will forgive a lot.
Right.
And that you just said right. You see it, and I probably
because
said
there was a pause, and I didn't know what to do, so I filled the pause. I couldn't wait for you to finish your sentence.
I feel a lot more confident now in this production because I know whatever I say, you're going to clean it up.
No, well, it's more whatever. I'm going to clean up whatever.
Could you drop my voice by maybe just an
some
octave?
of those long, you have great pipes, but some of those long soliloquies I made, I routinely cut them out, and I know it while I'm doing it. But so again, this is my own list, and then step 5. So there's one is producing, research, the interview itself, editing. Step 5 to me is like the publishing of it, the dissemination of it. Maybe that's marketing, getting the word out. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of for me, it's a sort of you get that same, I don't know, dopamine hit when you hit kind of send or publish. So it's out there. It's kind of neat. Then do people what do you do to get the word out, marketing? I see you posting a lot when you just started the new podcast.
Yeah.
So I follow you. I follow your company, but I also follow you personally on a couple of different things. So I was seeing so it worked. I know you've got a new podcast.
And it definitely. I mean, that's probably the actual marketing of really any creative endeavor in some cases is like 80% of the work. When I think of the books that I've written, that's like 5% of the work that I've put in, and then it's the daily grind of letting people know and getting it out there and trying to look for opportunities to promote it. Same thing with the podcast. Once the podcast is done, then the work really starts. And for example, something that I've done, which I think you do as well, is I will take short sections and then post those on social media, 1 minute, 2 minute sections. You can go into social media, Facebook as an example, and join Facebook groups that can benefit. So I'm on maybe 10 or 15 small business entrepreneur groups. And so what I end up doing is I will find a clip from a podcast episode that I think is beneficial, and I'll post it. if you just go on and start saying, hey, listen to my podcast, your post is either going to be taken down or it's white noise. But if you in promoting your podcast, if you can focus on how can I help that group, that person,
Like adding value,
adding value,
to
then
somebody.
hopefully a natural benefit of that is that they will subscribe to your podcast.
And how about like just hashtags and things like that? Do you
Yeah,
think about those?
hashtags, absolutely. I mean, there are, Instagram is probably
And Twitter,
and
it, it works.
it does work. It
and
does
you can
work.
at people too, right?
Yeah.
If it's a certain organization, like a subject matter, you
100%.
can try anyway, and maybe they'll retweet you, or like that's sort of what was my kind of strategy with certainly with LinkedIn. If so, I do an interview with you, and I'm hoping that you will like it. Therefore, your entire network will see it.
100%.
And so for people watching out there, liking a video is a huge gift, in my opinion, because let's say 5 people like it. That's 5 networks. I've been disseminated to 5 people's networks, and
sharing,
sometimes more.
not
Sharing,
liking, but sharing.
Yeah, there's different ways of doing
yeah.
it. Or you make your own post and share. I was just did this video with Jim, and like, look at this, and so and that happens to various degrees, and it's fascinating to watch how things behave. So across the different platforms. So
you said earlier about if you get 26, did you say
20? If you get 28 downloads,
28
you're in
downloads.
the top 50% of all.
And I
podcasts.
remember when we started the first podcast, and there was on 2 days it hit 100, and it was like this amazing. I mean, you talk about a dopamine hit,
right?
And I had read somewhere that when you're looking at podcast numbers, and you see a number like 50 or a number like 100, just imagine 50 people in a room.
Yeah.
And how many people that is, or 100 people in a room, because people will look at that number. That's why a lot of podcasts, they do 7 or 8. They only have 100 downloads. They're disappointed and they end it. To have 100 people who are listening to your podcast, that's a big deal. If you said, I'm going to be speaking about this subject, and you went to a hall and 100 people showed up, that's a big deal.
Well, and it's also when it comes to, like, let's say LinkedIn, which was my original idea, it's the quality of those people, right? So it's a real, these are in theory business associates or people that are connected to me in some sometimes loose way, and that's why I kind of called it connections, because it's almost like that 6 degrees of separation kind of thing. Is like, and that's happened a few times. Like I just want to do interesting conversations, right? And so I've done some that are more viewed than others, and sometimes, boy, that's a really interesting conversation, but less people watch it. And I've started to kind of repost a couple of the older ones, because boy, it's not for everyone. It's not a business topic exactly, but and I started reposting some of the older ones. I don't want to be annoying and post. But for instance, we went to Aggie Gabor's book launch. That's where I saw you a month or 2 ago. But that day, before I left, I go, I did this interview 6 months ago, and she was talking about her new book, but it's just coming out now. So I just, light bulb, it's the first time I'd ever even thought of reposting. In honor of Aggie's book launch tonight, here's the video again. And I got a lot of views again.
Absolutely.
And then so the light bulb goes, well, maybe I should. The point is, not everyone's online all the time.
Absolutely.
And in LinkedIn in particular, some people are on LinkedIn once or twice a day.
Yeah.
Some people it's once a week. My wife might go there. She's got a job.
Yeah.
She might go once every 6 months. So people do sort of show up once a month, and something that I posted a month ago, they're just discovering it for the first time. So it is very unusual in that way. So
well, and remember that the algorithm, Facebook is particularly bad, but it will only show your post to maybe 20% of your. So you need to, if you have, 1,000 followers on LinkedIn, or 1,000 connections on LinkedIn, you can be publishing something for months and people have never heard of it because they don't see it.
Yeah.
Let me give you a tip, something for you to try. So you talked about the value of, you do an interview with me, I share it to my network, you get that network. How many episodes have you done so far?
Hard to say. I've done about 20. You're probably my 22nd interview, but that turns into like 40 or 50 videos because there's little versions.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Shorter version.
So here's something I'm going to do with Pros and Conversations. Perhaps you can do it. We'll compare notes. And that is, do like an end of year special. Do a series of specials where you have, a half-hour episode, but it includes 10 different interviews. So it could be something on podcasting. It could be something on, but a specific topic that everyone's touched on. Yeah. The great thing is that then you can go back to everybody, those 10 people, and say, can you share this on your networks? Yeah. And, if you're doing 12 episodes in a year, or 24 episodes in a year, but 4 of those episodes are, like they used to do, in television, they do a best of. Yeah.
I just did a highlight reel. That
perfect.
You just missed because you were one guest after the highlight reel, but I just everyone's quoted out of context. It's more like the sound bites. Yeah.
But if you can, I'm going to try that.
It's more promotional, right?
Because I've noticed that, for example, we've been interviewing all these great entrepreneurs, and we've interviewed a lot of women, and so I want to do an episode closer to the end of the year about women in entrepreneurship and women small business leaders, and I'm going to use quotes from all the different interviews and reach out to them, so that marketing, it's a game, it's a dance, it's, as you said, you don't want to be annoying, yet you still need to get it out there. I think you're doing the right thing in the sense of you're building a network.
I wanted to start slow too. I mean, it was hard to get people, we're talking pandemic project. It was hard to get people even to come here. And then eventually they did. And then once I had 2 or 3 to show, finished productions, this is what it looks like. This is what, okay. And then it was a little easier for people to come. Peter, thanks for coming. The website for your book is
the website for my books is storiesbypeter.com.
And do you have, how do we find your podcasts?
So if you go to storiesbypeter.com, the Musings and Other Nonsense podcast is there, or it's available wherever you get your podcasts. Just type in Musings and Other Nonsense.
Yeah. How about for just video production?
For video production, you can go to fortherecordproductions.com or videosthatmatter.ca.
Right. So thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute great time, and I'm glad a few false starts, but we got there in the end.
We're here. No one will know about the false starts, but now they will, because I can't edit that out.
Yeah, we should have edited that.
Maybe I will. Anyway, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.